Since the beginning of the day, the Russian army has tried to break through Ukrainian defenses 49 times, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The occupying forces advanced in 7 directions. Defense forces repelled 17 enemy attacks in the Pokrovsk sector of the front and recorded 13 more unsuccessful Russian assaults on the HYPERSONIC bridgehead. The Russian army also tried to advance 9 times in the Kostiantinovka direction.
In the Pokrovsk sector of the front, the enemy is clinging on, fighting for Hishina, fighting for a Lenivka, trying to push us out from some of the positions we still hold in the Pokrovsko-Mirnograd sector of the front. Next, the enemy will try to move toward Dobropilya in order to further advance its offensive in Donetsk region.
Since the beginning of spring, the Russians have once again started actively using heavy armored vehicles. According to the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, the enemy is using them in 3 directions: Lyman, Pokrovsk, and Kostiantinovka. Analysts suggest that this is how Russian forces are trying to probe the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses or are attempting to regroup and build up strength in order to continue their offensive.
With the roads improvement, they decided to step up their actions because their infiltration tactics were aimed at slow but steady advances, which does not satisfy the Russian military and political leadership. And that's why the task is to carry out operations more intensively. And that means in order to make such a push, to advance and so on, they need to use armored vehicles, which is exactly what they've been trying to do since the 17th.
Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War predicted this year Russian forces are unlikely to capture the line of fortifications. That's what they call the line of fortifications stretching from north to south in Ukraine, about 50 kilometers long, in the area of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkivka, and Kostiantinivka. Experts add that the Russian leadership is already preparing Russian citizens for news about the failure of the Kremlin spring offensive.
Russian troops are unlikely to capture the line of fortresses in 2026, but they will probably achieve some tactical successes at the cost of significant losses. Russian officials are already shaping expectations in the information space about slow progress and heavy losses. However, on March 23rd, one of the deputies of the Russian State Duma stated that there are casualties in every war, but Russian troops will try to minimize losses as they advance slowly toward Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. From the Institute for the Study of War report,
at the front, the Russian army continues to suffer significant losses. 890 Russian soldiers were eliminated by Ukrainian defense forces in just the past day. And the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale war have already exceeded 1,289,000 soldiers. These figures were announced by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Also, yesterday, 6 Russian tanks, 3 armored vehicles, more than 30 artillery systems, and 1 multiple rocket launcher system were destroyed.
Joining us now is Mykola Malamud, Army General and former Foreign Intelligence Chief of Ukraine from 2005 to 2010.
Greetings. Glory to the heroes.
Nikolai Grigorovich, here's an interesting point. As part of my job, I regularly monitor propaganda media. And the longer this so-called special military operation drags on, the more often they try to deny the massive losses that the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reports. And it would be nothing out of the ordinary, but Ukrainian intelligence and international SOSIN sources report that on the Hulyapole, Pokrovsk, and Lyman fronts, there's a constant influx, and not just rotation, but a complete arrival of new Russian soldiers, as Z military correspondents write, due to heavy losses. So where's the truth here, and where's the lie? Please explain the real situation at the front. And if I may, let me add a small clarification. The Russian occupiers have been trying to capture Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk agglomeration for, I think, more than 18 months now, but they still haven't managed to do it. So, are there losses or not?
Well, first of all, there are concrete facts. In this situation, we can say clearly that there have been no real successes in any of the operational directions where the enemy set out to capture territory. The main trump card that Putin supposedly kept up his sleeve was the capture of new cities, Kostiantinivka, Vovchansk, Pokrovsk, and especially Kupiansk and Huliaipol. And all of that turned out to be a big lie. So in this situation, the fact is that the enemy is not only failing to capture positions, but is losing 1,000, 1,200, sometimes even 1,600 of their so-called aggressive units every day. They are no longer the same as they were at the beginning or in the middle of the war. This is what we call reinforcement. It's made up of those mobilized or contracted Russians or foreigners whom they throw into battle. But the massive losses now are forcing Russian propaganda to hide this, because dissatisfaction is already growing in a very real way. If we're talking about 1,290,000, that's just among the actual forces who have felt the losses. These are their relatives. And that's already tens of millions of people who know what war is, not from Russian media, but from their own relatives. A son, husband, or brother didn't come back, or those who returned wounded show what's really happening. There are no prospects here, none of those so-called glorious victories. There's only death. That's why the entire Russian machine is now working to hide the losses, and most importantly, the numbers. But now they can no longer be hidden. So right now, on the one hand, they're saying the losses are minimal, but no one believes that anymore. And the second part is that they're claiming success, like you mentioned, the Pokrovsk direction, which we've already talked about on air. Putin has officially given orders 20 times with specific deadlines to capture Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. And as we can see, over the past year, nothing has changed. Yes, there are heavy battles there. They've entered the cities, but we're still holding part of Pokrovsk and part of Mirnograd. We're carrying out special operations in raids, counterattacks, and even an offensive operation, sorta, in Dobropilia. And just 2 weeks ago, we also liberated several areas. And it turned out that the biggest losses across the entire front were there. And even in just the past day, about 100 people were killed. That's just in this particular sector. If we're talking about the entire front, that's 12 to 1,300, which is a huge loss. Before that, it was 1,670, which is even more. So these are massive losses that the enemy is trying to cover up, because if you show every day how many are dying, it will affect not only the military, although they know better, the Russians, but most importantly, the Russian public, and that's already opposition to Putin. There's already internal discontent as it is. We're conducting operational research. There is, accordingly, unofficial data from both Russian and foreign sources. This internal threat to Putin is exactly what's very, very dangerous. That's why the team is working to cover all this up, to show that there are still some successes at the front, even though there aren't any, and on the other hand, to demonstrate on the international stage they're putting pressure on Trump, saying they still have prospects, everything is still ahead of them, there will be more reserves, and there will be a spring-summer offensive. And so that Trump puts pressure on Zelensky, on our negotiating team, so that we agree to Russian scenarios for making peace. In other words, to push us to the limit, even though they can't present the arguments at the front that they used to, so they're creating illusions instead.
Nikolai Nikolaevich, let's discuss another situation as well. The shelling of Lviv was horrific. I'd even call it brazen. They knew exactly where they were aiming. They understood it was the historic city center, a UNESCO heritage site. And this is a city that's so important to Ukraine in every way. They wanted to make a point. Look, we can strike. We can hit it. And all of this happened right after the negotiating team returned from the United States of America. Can we say that the Kremlin is trying to synchronize, so to speak, military escalation with diplomatic processes? In other words, trying to use blackmail? We literally have just 1 minute left on air. What's your opinion?
Well, there are two factors. The enemy is trying to show success on the front lines, but there aren't any. They compensate for this by striking civilian populations. This is happening all along the front, across the entire territory of Ukraine. Sometimes they target Kiev, sometimes the eastern regions, as always, and sometimes the western ones. They do it in groups, like they did this time. They don't care about what kind of targets they hit. The more civilians, children, elderly people, and cultural sites, even those recognized worldwide by UNESCO, that the enemy strikes, the better they think it is. This is meant to show that the aggression will continue. And the second point, which is very important for Putin, it's a personal trait of his, I know, is revenge. We are carrying out successful operations at the front, striking targets on Russian territory, including critical infrastructure. He tries to take revenge in return, so he looks for symbolic places to hit. This is a sign of global terrorism, and everyone should condemn this, not just Ukrainians, but the entire international community. This is provided for by international legal acts. Acts of terrorism by Russia are clearly global in nature. In any case, they will be held accountable for this.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.